You all really enjoyed my James talk. It went down really well, but it led to loads of questions about the Marys. So let's do the Marys. I find it helps to remember them, to separate them out into regions as well. So we've got Scotland, England and France. And Henry VIII here. There's a fire crackling in the background if it's noisy. This is Henry VIII, and Henry VIII had a couple of siblings, and let's hope it stays in focus. So over here was Margaret. His sister Margaret went north and married James IV of Scotland. So that's the connection to the Stuarts. Henry VIII's sister Margaret married James Stuart. Over here, he had another sister called Mary. Now, Mary Tudor went off to France, married the King of France. It didn't last long. So she came back, she married Charles Brandon and had a daughter called Frances. And she had a daughter called Jane. She becomes important later on in the succession story, but we'll come back to her. Over here, James and Margaret, they had a son, and he was called James V of Scotland. And he had a daughter, and she was called Mary. So this is one of our Marys here. She was Mary, Queen of Scots, so up here in Scotland. That's her relationship to Henry VIII there through her grandmother, who was Henry VIII's sister. So Henry had some children. He had Edward. He became king, but he died without an heir. So the throne went over to his eldest half-sister, Mary I. She didn't get it without a fight, because there was a fight from over here. Some people thought Lady Jane Grey was more appropriate, but Mary chopped off her head, so that was the end of that. Mary I, though, Bloody Mary, she died without an heir, and so the throne went to her half-sister, Elizabeth. She became Elizabeth I. Now, Elizabeth I was fighting with Mary, Queen of Scots, because she was a Catholic threat to Elizabeth's throne, and Elizabeth eventually chopped off her head, so that was the end of that. But Elizabeth died without heir, so where were they going to go? Mary was gone, over here Jane was gone, but Mary had a son, and he was called James VI of Scotland, but he was raised a Protestant, so it was thought that James would be appropriate, and he became James I of England and James VI of Scotland. So you were asking me about the other Mary. Well, Charles I had a son. No, James I had a son, and he was called Charles I. Charles I lost his head, but not before having a son, and he was Charles II. Charles II died without heir, but he did have... Oh, lost my pen. He did have a brother, and he was called James. Now, James was the second of England. He had a son called James, who would have become king, but the two of them were deposed. They were Catholic. He was a bit useless. They were sent off to France. See, there we go. We're still in France there. And his daughter, James's daughter, who was Mary, became Mary the